You want to know what happens when a petty HOA president tries to strong-arm a veteran into surrendering his own land? Let me paint it for you. One Tuesday morning, I received a notarized letter demanding I open my dam gate or face financial ruin. They thought fear would break me, but here's the thing I don't break. Not when my family's pond has been lawful since before their subdivision even existed. Not when I have every document, every blueprint, every inspection signed and sealed. So, I followed their order exactly. I opened the gate, documented every second, and let the water flow. And when the skies opened up days later, Maple Crest's picture-perfect lawns turned into a swamp. The same neighbors who cheered their tyrant president suddenly realized gravity doesn't bend to clipboards. They called me reckless, dangerous, a menace. But the truth, I was obedient, dangerously obedient. And sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply giving a bully exactly what they asked for. Before I dive into the madness, tell me in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are. I love knowing just how far these HOA dramas travel. The envelope came on a morning so calm, so deceptively ordinary that I almost laughed at the contrast. A golden sunrise lit the tops of the pines surrounding my land, the air sharp with the smell of wet grass and wood smoke drifting from a neighbor's chimney half a mile down the road. 35 acres, my acres sat on the ridge above Maple Crest Preserve, a sprawling development that had only existed for a little over 20 years. My family's land had been here since 1952 when my grandfather bought it with cash-earned welding barges at the shipyard. Back then, there was no HOA, no covenants, no committees measuring the height of grass with a tape measure. Just trees, streams, and the kind of peace you can only buy once in a lifetime. I carried my mug of coffee out to the porch, savoring the stillness when I noticed the cream-colored envelope sticking out of the mailbox. Even from a distance, it looked heavy, like it was carrying trouble. The embossed lettering in gold read Maple Crest Preserve Homeowners Association. My brow furrowed instantly. I didn't live in Maple Crest. I never had. Yet here was their name plastered on a letter delivered to me. I tore it open at the table, and my stomach turned at the words on the page. Notice of violation, it began. Retention pond in violation of safety code. Excess water storage poses imminent flood risk. Drainage must be released. Dam gate must be lowered. Non-compliance will result in fines and liability for all downstream damages. The fine itself, $2,900. And at the bottom, with all the self-importance of a queen signing her royal decree, was the name Karen Whitlock, HOA president. Karen Whitlock, better known around town as Clipboard Karen. She'd moved into Maple Crest 2 years ago, left a career in real estate behind, and somehow convinced a neighborhood of wealthy homeowners to hand her the crown. She patrolled sidewalks with a tape measure, measured garbage can placement with a stopwatch, and scolded kids for leaving chalk drawings on driveways. Now it seemed her authority had expanded past the borders of her HOA and onto my property. I almost laughed, but the photos clipped to the back wiped the humor clean away. High-resolution shots of my pond, my dam gate, even my old workshop with rusted tools laid out on the bench. The angle was unmistakable, straight-down drone footage. They'd flown a drone over my land without asking, without warning. Private land. The violation of it made my jaw clench. Still, I wasn't worried. That pond wasn't some mud puddle thrown together with scrap lumber. I'd built it in 1992, with county-approved blueprints signed off by engineers. It was a spring-fed system, carefully managed to catch overflow and release it gradually. For decades, it had protected not just my property, but the very neighborhood Karen claimed to be defending. Every big storm, every hurricane that swept through North Carolina, my gates slowed the rush, saved their basements from flooding. The truth was written in 30 years of records. I called the county water inspector's office. A man named Dale picked up a man I'd known for years. "Dale," I said, reading him the notice word for word, "they're fining me for my pond." He chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "You've been compliant since day one," he assured me. "Your system is grandfathered in. I've seen it myself. They can't touch you." That calmed me for a while. I gathered my records, the original blueprints with the 1,992 approval stamp, the inspection from 2010, labeling the system excellent condition. I sent everything in a polite email to the HOA attaching the documents, writing clearly that my pond was both legal and beneficial. I thought that would be the end. I thought logic and proof would settle it. I was wrong. 2 days later, another letter landed in my box. This one curt, dismissive, and far more threatening. "Documents irrelevant," it read. "Operational permit expired 2015. You are in violation." Below the line was a string of numbers bold as a fingerprint. WRP 2010448B, a permit number they claimed. But I knew my paperwork like I knew the calluses on my own hands. That number meant nothing. The county didn't issue expiring permits for retention systems. The approval was one and done. What they'd sent me wasn't just misleading, it was fraudulent. I sat in my workshop that night, leafing through file folders thick with decades of papers. Each blueprint, each inspection, each letter carefully labeled. And sure enough, I found my original approval number, not even close to the format of the one the HOA had cited. My anger simmered sharp and cold. They weren't mistaken. They were lying. Someone had fabricated a permit out of thin air to pin me as a violator. The next morning, my nephew Jesse texted me a link. He's a firefighter, sharp kid, good with tech. The link opened to a Facebook post in the Maple Crest group. There it was again, drone footage of my pond, dramatic music layered over it, captioned with fear-mongering words. Uphill landowner hoarding water. Families at risk. County must act now. The comments underneath were poison. Strangers calling me reckless, demanding the HOA sue me, demanding I be stopped before I flooded their million-dollar homes. None of them had met me. None of them knew the truth. I leaned back, staring at the screen at the fake permit number at the drone footage stolen from above my land. It was clear as crystal now, this wasn't about water safety. This was about power, control. Maybe even land. Karen Whitlock had manufactured a crisis, forged documents, and sicked her neighborhood against me. She thought I'd fold. She thought I'd drain my pond, tear down the gate I'd built with my own hands, and bow to her paper crown. But she underestimated me. I had spent 20 years in the Army. I knew battles weren't won with brute force alone. You gather intelligence, you know your enemy, and then sometimes you use their own rules against them. That night, I drafted a letter invoking the North Carolina Public Records Act. If Karen wanted to play with paperwork, I'd bury her in it. I requested every scrap of communication the HOA had about me, emails, votes, reports. I sent it certified mail, signed and sealed. And as I slid the envelope across the post office counter, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was war. A war fought not with fists, but with ink signatures, and if I played it right, gravity itself. When I sealed that certified envelope demanding records from Maple Crest Preserve, I thought maybe, just maybe, it would rattle them enough to back down. Most bullies fold when you stop being their doormat. But Karen Whitlock was a different breed. She thrived on pressure, on the idea that her clipboard and a few legal phrases gave her dominion over everyone within shouting distance. What she hadn't counted on was that I'd lived through firefights overseas, survived years of bureaucratic red tape in the Army, and learned long ago how to weaponize patience. Days passed in silence, the kind that makes your skin itch. I knew she had my letter. I had the little green return receipt signed by her property manager. Still nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement. Instead, what I did get was another escalation. A manila envelope arrived thick and deliberate, stamped with the HOA's management company's seal. Inside, dozens of pages, all heavily redacted. Whole paragraphs blacked out with the kind of marker you could smell through the paper. To a fool, it might look intimidating. To me, it was a sign they were hiding something. I combed through every page under the glow of the workshop lamp. That's when I found it tucked between the blackout bars, an error. They'd forgotten to redact a single email. Just one. The subject line, the uphill problem. The body of the email was worse. He's not even in the HOA. Let's push hard. We can't have water pooling up there. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. My jaw tightened. It wasn't about safety. It was about forcing me under their control, dragging me into their fiefdom, even though my land had stood independent for generations. And the permit number they kept throwing at me. WRP 2010448B. I brought it to Dale, the county water inspector. I knew I couldn't just rely on my own word. I needed official confirmation. Dale peered at it, squinting like he was trying to read a bad joke. Never seen a number like that in 30 years, he muttered. And the guy whose signature they've got on here, Bill Patterson, he retired in 2008. The so-called permit was dated 2010. The HOA had forged a document and slapped on the name of a man who hadn't even worked for the county in 2 years. That wasn't just sloppy, it was criminal. I felt a cold, satisfying anger bloom in my chest. Karen thought she was playing checkers, but I'd switched us to chess. Meanwhile, Jesse was following the online chatter like a hawk. He sent me screenshots of the Maple Crest Facebook group, drone clips spliced with ominous music captions, warning that the old man on the hill was a ticking time bomb. Comment after comment, homeowners fanned the flames, calling me reckless, greedy, even dangerous. It was mob mentality at its finest. But Jesse just smirked. They're playing the narrative game, uncle. Let's hit back with facts and footage. That weekend, Jesse brought his own drone. Together we walked the property line survey map in hand, measuring tapes stretched across the dirt. When his drone went up, the footage was undeniable, the dam gate a full 15 feet inside my boundary. He even overlaid the county plat map, drawing the red line clear as day, my land, their land. The HOA had zero jurisdiction. Yet there they were trespassing in the sky and inventing paperwork to extend their reach. But footage and plat maps weren't enough. I wanted more, something they couldn't spin. That's when I called Travis, my neighbor's son, bright kid studying civil engineering at NC State. I showed him the pond, the gate, the way water trickled down the natural channel toward the greenbelt below. His eyes lit up. They're saying this increases flood risk. He almost laughed. It's the opposite. Your gate reduces peak flow. If you took it out, they'd drown every time it rained hard. Travis spent his weekend drafting a hydrology report, 2 pages of charts, diagrams, rainfall models. His conclusion: my pond protected Maple Crest. Removing the gate, as Karen demanded, would cause significant downstream erosion and predictable flooding. It was the kind of document judges and inspectors love: clean, precise, scientific. And best of all, it came from someone with no skin in the game, just the truth. So I built a file. Thick, heavy, undeniable. Inside, my original blueprints from 1992, county inspection reports labeling the pond in excellent condition, the HOA's forged permit with Patterson's fake signature, the unredacted email showing intent to push hard despite no jurisdiction, Jesse's drone footage overlaying property lines, Travis's engineering report proving the HOA's demand would worsen flooding. Every page, every photo, every timestamp told a single story: Karen Whitlock wasn't protecting anyone. She was manufacturing a crisis to seize control of something that had never belonged to her. But the real turning point came with the next letter. This one wasn't just printed on cheap paper. It was notarized, embossed with a gold seal delivered by courier. Final notice of violation, it screamed in bold red. Immediate compliance required. Drain retention pond. Remove all artificial barriers. Failure to comply will result in maximum fines and full liability for all future flood events. I remember reading that line twice. Liability for all future flood events. They were trying to make me personally responsible for any storm that hit their subdivision. It was laughable in its arrogance, but was also the gift I'd been waiting for. Because by making their illegal demand official, signed, sealed, and notarized, they'd shifted the battlefield. I sat at my desk, the letter spread out under the lamplight, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought they were tightening the noose. In reality, they just handed me the rope. That night I began drafting my counteroffensive. I wasn't going to fight this with anger or fists, number. I was going to fight with their own words, their own signatures, and the oldest law in existence, the law of gravity. By the time the courier's tires crunched down my gravel driveway, I already knew the game had changed. That notarized letter with its gold seal wasn't a threat, it was a lifeline, though not in the way Karen Whitlock intended. Because the moment I complied with it on record, every ounce of liability shifted squarely onto her HOA. It's one thing to bully a neighbor with fake fines. It's another to sign your name on a demand that could unleash a flood. She had just weaponized her own clipboard against herself, and I intended to use it. But first I needed more ammunition, so Jesse and I took a Saturday to map everything. We walked the property line with survey stakes, pounded them into the earth until the boundary looked like a row of tiny red flags. His drone swept overhead, capturing crisp 4 kelvins footage, my dam gate gleaming in the sun sitting 15 feet inside my property. He even layered on the official county plat map, digitally overlaying the line so there could be no dispute. The proof wasn't abstract anymore. It was visual, undeniable. Karen, meanwhile, had been busy whipping up hysteria. On Maple Crest's Facebook group, new posts popped up daily. Grainy drone clips of my pond set to ominous music, captions warning of impending disaster, and the comments, good lord, the comments. Strangers I'd never spoken to called me reckless, selfish, even criminal. One man wrote, "If his dam breaks, we should sue him into bankruptcy before our houses wash away." Another chimed in, "He's hoarding water while our kids play downhill. It's a ticking time bomb." It would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Karen wasn't just painting me as a nuisance. She was shaping me into a villain, setting the stage so that when something inevitably happened, the mob would already have their scapegoat. It was propaganda at the HOA level. That's when I realized this wasn't just a battle of property lines, it was a war of narratives. And if I let her control the story, I'd lose facts, be damned. Uncle Jesse said, scrolling through the Facebook comments they're running on fear. So let's hit back with truth. Let's build our own narrative. One they can't twist. He was right, so we set to work. I gathered everything, the notarized demand, the forged permit, Travis's hydrology report, but I needed context, something that showed not just that I was right, but that the HOA was dangerously wrong. That's when Travis brought up something that made my jaw tighten. You know about riparian buffers, right? He asked. I shook my head. They're strips of vegetation, grasses, trees, cattails that soak up runoff, filter water, and prevent erosion. North Carolina requires them around streams and drainage systems. They're not just pretty, they're law in certain basins. Remove them and you destabilize the entire system. My eyes widened because I'd just seen crews from the HOA landscaping company mowing down the wide strip of cattails and native grasses along the Maple Crest greenbelt. Karen wanted her spring fete to look clean and manicured, so she ordered them raised. She hadn't just made a cosmetic choice, she'd potentially violated environmental rules designed to protect water quality. Jesse grinned as his drone rose into the sky again. Let's catch them in the act. And we did. His camera hovered as the landscapers chewed through 30 feet of buffer, reducing what had been a natural sponge into bare exposed dirt. In the span of an hour, they'd eliminated the last line of defense between my controlled stream and their neighborhood storm drain. Worse yet, that drain itself hadn't been cleaned in years. From my property line, I could see it half choked with last fall's leaves, grass clippings, even a discarded soda bottle. Karen wanted to scream about my pond, but she ignored the real ticking time bomb at the bottom of her hill, a clogged culvert that no engineer in their right mind would call safe. The irony was rich. They accused me of creating a flood risk, yet they were the ones dismantling their safety nets piece by piece. Still, I didn't want to rely on irony. I wanted documentation. So we filmed everything, the crews cutting down the cattails, the bare slope left behind the water pooling at the clogged drain. Jesse time-stamped it all. Travis drafted a brief memo citing the state's riparian buffer rules, explaining how the HOA's actions could not only worsen flooding but also violate environmental regulations. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. What Karen called reckless hoarding was in reality a 30-year system that reduced peak water flow. What she painted as dangerous negligence was actually her HOA's negligence, destroyed buffers, clogged culverts, ignored engineering warnings. That night, sitting in my workshop with the files spread across the workbench, I felt something shift. This wasn't about proving my innocence anymore. It was about showing the truth so clearly that not even Karen's shrillest tirades could drown it out. Still, a part of me wondered why. Why go to such lengths? Why forge permits, fly drones, stir panic on social media? The answer came from that unredacted email. He's not even in the HOA. Let's push hard. Karen didn't just want compliance, she wanted control. If she could fold my land under Maple Crest's authority, she'd extend her empire beyond the subdivision. My pond, my ridge, my independence, it was all in her crosshairs. But here's the thing about empire builders. They forget gravity doesn't take sides. As I locked the file cabinet that night, the rain began to patter on the tin roof. Nothing heavy, just a drizzle. Still, I stood by the window, staring down toward Maple Crest. Their lawns glistened under the streetlights, perfect rows of tulips and fresh mulch waiting for the big spring party Karen had been bragging about. I whispered to myself, almost amused, "You want the water, Karen, you'll get it. Not from me, at least. Not directly. From the sky, from the earth, from gravity itself." Because I knew one thing they'd never accept until it was too late. You can bully a man with fines and threats, but you can't bully nature. And nature was on my side. The drizzle that night was just the opening act. By Wednesday morning, the weather report promised a front rolling in from the west, a multi-day system forecast to dump several inches of rain across the county. I sat on my porch sipping coffee and watched the clouds churn into darker shapes. The air had that heavy scent of ozone, like the atmosphere itself was pregnant with consequence. I knew my pond could handle it. Every inspection since 1992 proved it. What I didn't know was how Maple Crest's mutilated greenbelt would fare without its natural defenses. 2 days earlier, Jesse and I had stood by the old oak, his drone buzzing above us as the landscapers mowed down decades of cattails and switchgrass. Their machines chewed through the buffer zone like it was nothing more than clutter. Yet those plants weren't clutter, they were guardians. Their roots dug deep, holding soil in place, slowing runoff, filtering pollutants. State guidelines on riparian buffers weren't suggestions. They were mandates for good reason. But Karen saw a thicket of weeds where there was actually a living dam, and so with her blessing the HOA scalped the land bare. From my vantage point I could see the aftermath. The slope now gleamed raw and muddy, a barren ramp funneling directly into the storm drain at the bottom of the field. And that drain was already half blocked with leaves, sticks, and garbage. No one in the HOA had bothered to clear. It was like planning a parade route across a crumbling bridge. You could predict exactly how it would end. Jesse reviewed the drone footage with a satisfied grin. "We've got them red-handed," he said. He edited together the clips into a neat timeline, the buffer before lush and intact, the landscapers grinding it into mulch, the exposed soil stripped and vulnerable. Over the top, he added rainfall data from NOAA overlays of the county plat maps and Travis's hydrology report. The narrative was airtight. Karen wanted to claim my pond was a hazard, fine. But the record showed it was their actions, not mine, that transformed Maple Crest into a flood waiting to happen. Meanwhile, Karen was still marching around with her clipboard sending out glossy invitations for the Spring Garden Fete. That event was her crowning jewel. Lemonade stands a contest for the best roses, vendor tents lining the greenbelt, and she'd chosen the very slope her landscapers had just butchered as the centerpiece of the celebration. I stared at the flyer one of my neighbors had shoved into my mailbox and nearly choked on my coffee. It was like holding a blueprint for disaster. Then fate added another twist. On Thursday morning, construction crews at the cul-de-sac broke a water main while installing an in-ground pool. Thousands of gallons of chlorinated water gushed downhill, flowing straight into the clogged culvert at the bottom of the greenbelt. By the time workers capped it, the field had turned into a muddy swamp. My steady little trickle from the dam was nothing compared to that torrent, yet Karen didn't mention a word about the pool in her frantic posts online. In her story, I was still the villain. But Jesse's footage told a different tale. His drone captured the burst main flooding into the blocked drain, the bare slope failing to absorb a drop, the puddle spreading like a bruise across their manicured turf. He stitched it together with his earlier footage of the buffer removal. The result was damning cause and effect, step by step. HOA negligence, not my pond, had set the stage. By Friday, the rain began in earnest. A steady curtain fell through the night, tapping against the tin roof of my workshop. I sat with the files spread out before me, blueprints, reports, photos, each piece a bullet in the chamber of a gun I hadn't asked to carry but was now ready to fire. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice echoing from decades past the day he showed me the land and said, "This place will take care of you if you take care of it." I had honored that promise. Could the same be said for Karen and her kingdom below? Not a chance. Saturday dawned gray and sodden. From my porch I watched rivulets of water snake down the hill, pooling at the edge of the greenbelt. The Spring Garden Fete was supposed to begin at noon, but by 10 o'clock the field looked less like a party ground and more like the shallow end of a swamp. White stakes marking vendor booths jutted out of the muddy water like sad little gravestones. Tulips wilted under the weight of rain. Yet Karen still clung to her delusion, posting on Facebook that the weather was a minor inconvenience and that festivities would proceed as planned. By then, Jesse's video was complete, a 10-minute documentary laying out the sequence with clinical precision. He added timestamps, overlaid rainfall totals, and inserted Travis's conclusion that my pond reduced flood risk while HOA mismanagement amplified it. The pièce de résistance was the shot of Karen's notarized letter demanding I open my dam gate. He froze the frame, zoomed in on her signature beneath the words, "Remove all artificial barriers." Uncle Jesse said, sliding his laptop across the table, "This isn't just evidence, it's a story, and stories stick." I nodded, a grim smile tugging at my lips. Then it's time the county heard it. That afternoon, as rain continued to fall and the fete sputtered into chaos, I attached Jesse's video to a short, simple email. I addressed it to Dale, the county inspector who'd stood by me from the start. My message was only 5 words long, I complied. They didn't. Regards. I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the thunder roll over the hills. The die was cast. Karen had wanted to drag me into her theater of control, but now the stage lights were shining on her, and the audience wasn't a handful of angry homeowners, it was the county government. As dusk settled, I stepped outside and walked down to the dam. The gate creaked softly, releasing a controlled stream of clear spring water into the runoff channel. It wasn't violent. It wasn't reckless. It was steady, measured exactly as designed. I ran my hand over the cold steel of the mechanism and whispered, "Your move, Karen." Because now it wasn't about whether the rain would fall. It was about how much her neighborhood could endure without the very buffer she destroyed. And as every soldier learns, sometimes you don't have to fire a shot. Sometimes you just step aside and let the enemy walk straight into their own ambush. The storm broke fully that Sunday night. I'd seen heavy rain before, thunderheads that rolled in from the coast, hurricanes that rattled windows and pulled shingles from rooftops, but this was different. The downpour came in waves, hammering the roof of my porch so loudly that even the radio struggled to cut through. Every drop seemed heavier, hungrier, pulled downhill by gravity with a kind of vengeance. I sat in my chair, eyes fixed on the black line of trees separating my land from Maple Crest. By midnight, my GoPro was already doing its job. Jesse had mounted it high in the oak tree overlooking the dam gate, its lens capturing the entire mechanism from release lever to runoff channel. The little red light blinked, faithfully recording every second. Insurance-proof and impartial witness. If Karen ever accused me of recklessness, I could roll the tape. That tape would show the truth, how carefully I'd opened the gate just 2 inches, nothing more. The release wasn't a floodgate, but a spout, a steady, arm-thick stream of spring water flowing down the same natural channel it had followed for 100 years. No violence, no sudden surge, just controlled release, exactly as the county had advised. But Karen didn't want control, she wanted submission. And by sending me that notarized order, she thought she had cornered me. Instead, she had trapped herself. Dale had told me plainly over the phone, if you comply with their written directive, the liability is theirs. Document it all. That sentence had stuck with me. It wasn't just reassurance, it was a battle plan. So I had posted my own notice by the dam, a laminated sheet nailed to a wooden stake. It read, per notarized directive from Maple Crest HOA dated the 12th of October, the retention gate is being opened under protest and to comply with their order. Beneath it, I'd stapled a photocopy of Karen's final notice, her signature visible to anyone passing by. I mailed certified copies to the HOA, to the county office, even to an old Army buddy turned lawyer. The paper trail was airtight. When the first real torrents of rain came, I sat on the porch with Jesse, his phone linked to the GoPro feed. On screen, we watched water flow cleanly from the gate down into the runoff channel, exactly as designed. The channel handled it beautifully, winding through the woods before disappearing into the thicket that bordered Maple Crest. My pond level dropped by just a few inches, stable, safe, compliant. But downhill things were unraveling. Jesse sent his drone up during a lull in the storm, and the footage made my stomach clench. The greenbelt where Karen had planned her spring fete was gone, buried under a spreading lake of brown water. The cattails she'd bulldozed would have slowed the flow. Instead, the bare slope turned into a mudslide, feeding torrents straight into the clogged culvert. The pipe couldn't take it. Water pooled higher and higher, until it spilled sideways, creeping into the pristine backyards of 3 houses at the bottom of the hill. The images were stark. White vinyl fences half submerged. Fresh sod peeling up like wet carpet. Patio furniture drifting like forgotten toys. And all the while, my small stream of runoff fed steadily into the chaos, not recklessly, but inevitably. By dawn, the fete was a joke. Vendor stakes jutted out of the flood like white bones in a swamp. The HOA had promised lemonade and flower contests. Instead, they got a shallow brown lake littered with floating mulch. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. You? The voice on the other end was shrill, ragged with fury. Karen, you opened that dam of yours. You flooded us deliberately. Do you have any idea what you've done? Our homes, our yards, you'll pay for this. We're ruined, I let her rant. Every word was venom, accusations flying faster than the rain. I held the phone away from my ear, took a slow sip of coffee, then answered calmly. Karen, I said, using her first name for the first time, I did exactly what you ordered. You have my certified letter. You have your notarized directive. Everything is in writing. You wanted the water, and you got it. Silence. The kind that hangs heavy where even breathing sounds too loud. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized what I'd said. The liability wasn't mine anymore, it was hers. She sputtered, muttered something about lawyers, and hung up. But Karen's panic was only the beginning. By noon, a new drone buzz filled the air, not Jesse's this time, but the county's. It hovered, methodically scanning the flooded greenbelt, recording evidence for official records. And then, not long after, county inspectors arrived in yellow vests. From my porch, I watched them wade through knee-deep water, clipboards in hand, pointing at the clogged culvert, the bare slope, the leaning retaining wall behind the 3rd house. One of my neighbors called later to give me the inside scoop. The inspectors aren't even looking at your land, he said breathlessly. They're focused on us on the HOA. They found violations left and right. That retaining wall? They flagged it in 2017, said it needed repairs. The board ignored it. Now water's seeping straight through. The cherry on top came when a county engineer, her boots sinking into the muck, reportedly turned to a board member and said, "Ma'am, you can't vote against gravity." That line spread through Maple Crest like wildfire. By the evening, residents were posting furious comments in their private group, not at me, but at Karen. Why hadn't the culvert been maintained? Who ordered the landscapers to clear the buffer? Why had the retaining wall been ignored? Questions stacked up like sandbags, and for once Karen had no clipboard big enough to hide behind. From my porch, I watched the storm ease into a drizzle. The pond on my land refilled slowly, steady as always. Downhill Maple Crest looked like a battlefield, yards scarred, lawns drowned, a community greenbelt turned into a muddy crater. And all of it, every drop, had been brought on by their own arrogance. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Battles aren't won with a single blow, they're won with persistence. And this war was far from over. But as I closed the dam gate back to its normal setting and listened to the water settle, I allowed myself a thin smile. Karen had demanded obedience. She got it. And obedience wielded with precision had become the sharpest weapon of all. The morning after the deluge, I walked the ridgeline with a thermos of black coffee in hand. The storm had passed, leaving behind that eerie stillness that follows a long night of thunder where the air feels too clean, too hollow. My pond sat quiet, the water level a few inches lower but steady, clear calm. Exactly as it was designed. But down below, Maple Crest looked like a war zone. I didn't need binoculars to see the damage. The entire greenbelt, the field where Karen had planned her spring garden fete, was underwater. White vendor stakes stuck out like sad little crosses from a muddy brown lake. Patio chairs floated near the storm drain that was now fully submerged. The decorative retaining wall behind the third house sagged ominously, cracks spiderwebbing through the brick. A place that had been marketed as luxury living now looked like the bottom of a drained swamp. Yet somehow Karen still clung to her fantasy. Around 10 a.m., Jessie showed me her latest Facebook post. "Our spring fete is only postponed, not canceled. Cleanup will begin immediately. We will pursue legal action against the irresponsible landowner uphill." The words were defiant, but the comments told a different story. Residents weren't angry at me anymore. They were angry at her. Parents posted photos of flooded backyards, ruined playsets, flower beds reduced to sludge. One man wrote, "We've told the board for years to fix that drain. You ignored us. This is on you." The tide was turning. Still, I wasn't ready to leave anything to chance. Jessie and I sat down to compile the footage into a single file, our masterpiece. 10 minutes long, crystal clear, time-stamped to the second. First shots of the landscapers mowing down the buffer zone. Then the burst water main, flooding into the culvert. Next drone footage showing my dam gate trickling a modest stream while the greenbelt transformed into a lake. Finally, a still frame of Karen's notarized order demanding the gate be opened, her signature beneath those damning words, "Remove all artificial barriers." Jessie laid in rainfall data from the National Weather Service overlays of the county plat maps, marking property lines, and even Travis's hydrology models, showing how my pond reduced peak flow. It wasn't an opinion piece. It was a forensic report disguised as a video. Facts, graphs, evidence undeniable and devastating. I drafted a simple cover email to Dale, the county inspector. Per Maple Crest, HOA's notarized directive dated the 12th of October. I complied by opening the retention gate. The enclosed footage demonstrates the results. Regards, Harlan. Short, factual, ice cold. Then I hit send. That same afternoon, county trucks began rolling into Maple Crest. Workers in neon vests set up tripods, unspooled survey lines, and peered through transit levels at the flooded terrain. I stayed up on my ridge, sipping coffee, watching the scene unfold like a movie I'd seen 100 times in the Army, the aftermath inspection, the calm after chaos. My neighbor Frank, one of the quieter board members, called me that evening. His voice carried the kind of weary honesty that doesn't need theatrics. "They're not looking at you, Harlan," he said. "The inspectors have a list a mile long. Buffer violations, stormwater non-compliance, that retaining wall flagged years ago. It's ugly, real ugly." I asked what Karen was doing. He chuckled dryly. "Yelling, pointing at your hill, but nobody's listening anymore." And then he told me the line that would become legend. Apparently one of the county engineers, a woman in muddy boots, stood at the flooded greenbelt with a clipboard in hand. When Karen demanded they find me immediately, the engineer just shook her head and said, "Ma'am, you can't vote against gravity." That sentence ricocheted through Maple Crest like a bullet. By that night, residents were whispering it, repeating it, posting it online. Karen's authority, once absolute, was dissolving faster than the mulch floating in their backyards. The following day, a news van parked at the entrance to the subdivision. A young reporter in a raincoat stood in front of the camera, gesturing at the drowned greenbelt behind her. On live television, she called it a mysterious flood that has disrupted the Maple Crest community. A few residents came forward to talk, faces tight, with frustration, voices trembling with anger. They didn't mention me. They mentioned clogged drains, ignored maintenance, and a board that cared more about policing flower pots than protecting homes. But the best part came when an older resident, one of the original homeowners, stepped into the frame. His words were steady, unpolished, but sharp as a blade. "This ain't no mystery. We told the board for years to clear that drain. They ignored us. They were too busy handing out fines for trash cans. This was always coming. I nearly spit out my coffee when I heard it. The truth was no longer mine alone, it was theirs. The residents had turned. The foundation of Karen's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing in full view of the public." That night, Jesse pulled the GoPro card and uploaded the full footage to a private drive just in case. "This is our ace in the hole," he said. "If they try to twist it, we drop this file where the whole county can see." I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not victory yet, that was still coming, but peace. Because the truth had momentum now, rolling downhill with the same inevitability as the water itself. And like gravity, once it starts moving, you can't stop it. Karen wanted obedience, and she got it. But she hadn't calculated what obedience looks like when it's backed by records, footage, and nature's own math. She wanted control. What she got instead was exposure. And as the county wrapped up their inspections, I knew the next step was inevitable. There would be hearings, fines, maybe even criminal charges for that forged permit with a dead man's signature. But none of it required me to lift another finger. My job was done, the evidence was gathered, the die was cast. I poured another cup of coffee, leaned back in my porch chair, and whispered the engineer's words under my breath. "You can't vote against gravity." The fallout from that storm hit Maple Crest harder than any flash flood ever could. By Tuesday evening, word had spread like wildfire. The county had issued a formal notice of violation, not to me, but to the HOA itself. $85,000 in fines were on the table for buffer destruction, stormwater mismanagement, and failure to repair the retaining wall, first flagged in 2017. It was written in dry bureaucratic language, but the meaning was clear. The HOA was guilty, and the county had the receipts. For me, the timing couldn't have been sweeter. That same night, the board called an emergency meeting inside their shiny white clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, never had been, never would be. But Frank, the quiet board member I trusted more than most, filled me in later. Karen began the meeting in classic form. Clipboard in hand, voice shrill, she tried to rewrite history. She waved the notarized letter like a battle flag, claiming it was evidence of my refusal to comply. According to her, I had flooded them maliciously, deliberately, and that I alone should shoulder the blame. She demanded the board vote to authorize an immediate lawsuit against me, but Frank had come prepared. He stood silently until Karen finished her tirade. Then, without a word, he plugged a flash drive into the projector. The screen lit up, and Jesse's 10-minute video began to play. The room fell silent. First came the footage of the landscapers, scalping the buffer, time-stamped and undeniable. Then the burst water main flooding into the clogged culvert. Next, the drone footage of my dam releasing only a controlled trickle, while the greenbelt transformed into a swamp. Rainfall data overlaid with county plat maps scrolled across the screen. And finally, Karen's notarized directive, her own signature frozen on the screen beneath the words, "Remove all artificial barriers." When the video ended, silence hung like smoke. Frank told me later that even the board's staunchest Karen loyalist, a burly ex-security guard named Doug, couldn't meet her eyes. Residents began shouting, not at me but at her. Why wasn't the culvert cleaned? Who approved cutting down the buffer? What about the retaining wall? You knew about it since 2017. Karen's face, usually pink, with self-satisfaction drained pale. She stammered excuses, blamed contractors, blamed weather, blamed me. But no one was buying it anymore. For years, she had policed garden gnomes and trash can placement with an iron fist. Now, when real leadership mattered, she had nothing but excuses. The board voted 3-1 to suspend her presidency pending investigation. Her lone supporter Doug looked at the floor while the rest of the room erupted. Residents demanded answers. Some shouted for her resignation. Others asked who would cover the damages to their homes. One man flat out said, "If my insurance denies me, I'll see this board in court." The coup had begun. The very next morning, the county's official letter landed in HOA mailboxes. $85,000 in fines payable within 90 days. Insurance adjusters showed up later walking through backyards with clipboards. I overheard one of them near the cul-de-sac tell a homeowner, "I'm sorry, but your policy excludes damage caused by gross negligence." Translation, you're on your own. The HOA would have to levy a special assessment, forcing every homeowner to pay thousands out of pocket. That evening my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Karen's shriek. It was Frank. His tone carried exhaustion, but also gratitude. "Harlan," he said, "I wanted to thank you. That flood exposed the retaining wall issue. If it had gone during a bigger storm, we could have lost half a house. You didn't ruin us. You saved us from something worse." I let his words settle. For weeks I'd been painted as the villain. Now, at least to some, I was something else entirely. Still, Karen didn't go quietly. She stomped out of the clubhouse that night, screaming at residents, claiming conspiracy-threatening lawsuits. Someone caught it on a cell phone, and by the next day, the video was circulating online. The once powerful HOA president reduced to a ranting caricature, waving her clipboard like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. The sheriff's office soon announced a preliminary investigation into the forged permit. Bill Patterson himself, the retired engineer whose name appeared on the fake document, appeared on local news shaking his head. "That's not my signature," he said bluntly. "I retired in 2008. Whoever signed that in 2010 is lying." His disgust was palpable, and his credibility was bulletproof. The criminal angle gave the story new life. Local news anchors ran segments titled "Forgery Allegations Rock Maple Crest, HOA and Residents Demand Answers After Costly Flood." Suddenly, Karen wasn't the enforcer anymore, she was the target. Meanwhile, I kept to my ridge. I closed the dam gate back to its normal setting, letting the pond refill slowly. But I wasn't finished. With Travis's help, I began designing a new spillway wider and shallower than the old one lined with heavy river rock. It would handle a 100-year flood without breaking a sweat. Not because the county required it, but because I required it of myself. I didn't need Karen's approval to take care of my land. Weeks passed. Maple Crest's lawns slowly dried, but the scars remained. Residents whispered about special assessments, about whether to sue the old board, about how to move forward. Karen disappeared from public view, her once constant Facebook posts now eerily silent. Then one chilly morning I saw a moving truck outside her house. By sundown she was gone. No farewell, no apology, just gone. In the end, it wasn't my pond that drowned Maple Crest. It was Karen's arrogance. She tried to weaponize rules against me, but she forgot the oldest rule of all: you can't vote against gravity. When the moving truck finally pulled away from Karen Whitlock's driveway, leaving nothing but tire ruts and a half-dead lawn behind, the neighborhood exhaled like a man released from a chokehold. For weeks, she had been a storm unto herself, issuing threats, screaming into phones, flailing at board meetings with her clipboard like it was Excalibur. And then suddenly she was gone. No farewell note pinned to the bulletin board, no speech to justify her downfall. Just a short resignation email read aloud at a board meeting. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position as HOA president. It was the most anticlimactic end to the reign of a woman who had thrived on drama. Yet for Maple Crest, the true consequences of her empire were only beginning to unfold. Insurance companies flat out refused to cover the damages. The official word was gross negligence, and the list of violations proved it: buffer destruction, stormwater, mismanagement, failure to repair known hazards. That left the board with no choice but to levy a massive special assessment. Each homeowner received a letter demanding thousands of dollars to cover the county's fines, the cleanup of the flooded greenbelt, and compensation to the 3 families whose backyards had turned into swamps. The outrage was immediate. Residents who once clapped for Karen's speeches now cursed her name in the aisles of the local grocery store. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into the forged permit crawled forward. Detectives interviewed county employees, subpoenaed HOA emails, and eventually confirmed what I had known from the start. The document Karen had waved around was a fraud signed in the name of a man who had retired 2 years before its date. Patterson himself appeared on the news, shaking his head at the forgery. "That's not my signature," he said, his voice edged with disgust. "It's insulting, frankly." His testimony alone was enough to keep the sheriff's office busy with felony-level questions. But while Maple Crest wrestled with fines, insurance denials, and the bitter aftertaste of Karen's hubris, I turned my attention back to the land. My pond was calm again, the gate shut water rising back to its steady level. Yet I couldn't shake the thought, what if another storm like that came? What if the county drainage downstream failed again? I didn't want anyone, not even my loudest critics, to suffer because of something I could have prevented. So I hired Travis, the engineering student, to help me design a new spillway. Together we plotted out a secondary channel lined with heavy river rock wide enough to handle a 100-year flood. For 2 weeks, I rented a mini excavator and worked the soil until my arms ached. By the end, the channel gleamed like a scar of purpose, through the earth, elegant, functional, tested. The county inspector signed off, stamped it approved, and I mailed a copy to the HOA board. Not to gloat, but to record. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about honoring the land my grandfather had entrusted to me. Change was happening downhill too. The HOA, stripped of Karen's tyranny, brought in a real civil engineering firm. They rebuilt the greenbelt with rain gardens full of native plants, restored the buffer zone with cattails and grasses, and replaced the clogged culvert with a modern drainage system. Even the leaning retaining wall was reconstructed with proper reinforcements. For the first time, Maplecrest invested in real solutions rather than appearances. One evening, I was checking the new spillway when a car pulled up at my gate. It was Frank. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, and nodded toward my pond. "Looks good," he said simply. We stood there for a while listening to the water trickle. Then he added almost reluctantly, "You know, that flood forced us to fix things we should have fixed years ago. You didn't ruin us, Harlan. You saved us from a bigger disaster." I didn't need his thanks, but it mattered. It was the only apology I ever got and the only one I needed. Now, months later, life has returned to quiet. I drink my coffee on the porch, watch the water ripple in the pond, and enjoy the stillness my grandfather once promised me. When Maplecrest residents walk their dogs along the bottom of the hill, some glance up and nod. Not all, but some. And that nod carries something heavier than words respect. Because in the end, I hadn't won with fists or threats. I'd won with obedience, obedience to their order, obedience to the laws of physics, and obedience to my own sense of responsibility. They wanted me to open the gate. I did. Gravity did the rest. And when Karen tried to crown herself Queen of Maplecrest, she forgot the first and final rule: you can't vote against gravity. If there's one thing I learned through this storm, it's that bullies thrive only when people give in to fear. Karen thought she could bury me under forged papers, angry neighbors, and threats of lawsuits. But facts don't drown, and neither does integrity. When you stand your ground with patience and proof, even the loudest mob eventually falls silent. Nature itself reminded me of that truth. Water flows where it must. Gravity cannot be bullied. And in life the same holds true. Lies may rise for a season, but truth always finds its way downhill. So if you're facing a Karen of your own, a boss, a neighbor, or a board, don't panic. Document, prepare, and when the time comes, let their own demands undo them. If this story struck a chord, share your thoughts below. Have you ever stood your ground against a bully? Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you want more tales like this, filled with drama, irony, and just a bit of revenge served, cold hit subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.